Roughly 1 year ago, I made a video on whether or not all DAWs sound the same. In this video, I used Ableton and Logic to do my comparison because I found it the easiest. I also had used Ableton and Logic quite extensively, and this video did a lot better than I expected it to do. In this video, my conclusion was that Ableton and Logic do have a different sound to them, and I wasn't able to concretely explain why that was, especially considering that the internet had beaten this topic to death doing null tests left, right, and center. But I promised in the comments section that I would get to the bottom of it, and I'd have conclusive tests that had undeniable evidence of what it was that I was hearing. Now, since then, it's been quite a while, and it's taken a lot longer for me to understand what exactly was going on. It's been very interesting watching online that null tests still go on to this day. Heavy hitters online talk about how DAWs sound different and how this changes things, how Pro Tools, quote unquote, has more of a console sound, or Ableton and Logic have more of a soft kind of vibe to them, and I also was hearing something similar and wanted to get to the bottom of this. The answer, in essence, to whether or not all DAWs sound the same is it depends. And I know that's really annoying, but there's a lot of backstory I want to go over here to explain to you everything that I figured out, everything under the hood of the computer. I really went in depth trying to understand everything that I could, and I'm going to summarize it here for you today. Now, I treated this all kind of like an experiment, a scientific one. In any statistical experiment where you have a bunch of test subjects being the DAWs and music and all these factors, you have to have a constant. You have to have something that you can trust. And I realized that when I was using all of these different DAWs and they were giving me different sounds, I didn't know which one was true. I didn't know which one I could trust. But I needed somewhere that I could trust the sound of the music. And supposedly, Tidal, the streaming platform, was a platform that was delivering the highest pure quality playback of music that existed. Now, the only problem with Tidal is that you can't necessarily play your own files through it if you haven't had music released, of course. So my second task now that I've decided to go with Tidal is to find a secondary program that I could play my own files through that sounds the same as Tidal. For this, I used songs that I had released or that had been released that I'd worked on, mixed and mastered, that are on Tidal, and compared the original files to any other players that I would use online, any other programs, whatever it was. And I tried looking for something that would sound the same for a very long time. I was using the Finder audio player, just the native Mac one. I used iTunes, VLC player, Windows Media Player. There was a bunch of different ones that I downloaded and tried, and none of them were giving me the exact same sound as Tidal. And this was very annoying to me. But I discovered this concept when opening Tidal and going through the settings, that there was something called exclusive mode. Exclusive mode, now, I don't know if this is something that everybody knows. I feel like it's not, but exclusive mode is where you're able to get directly to your DAC or to your converter using core audio without having any DSP or anything touching the signal. Supposedly. At least that's my understanding of exclusive mode, the way that I searched it and whatever. For that reason, I trusted Tidal. It had exclusive mode, it had full 24-bit playback at up to 192 kilohertz, I believe, but I was listening to all the files at 24-bit 96K. Eventually, because of this exclusive mode, I was able to find another program called Foobar 2000. And I mentioned this in another video that I'd recently put out, and Foobar 2000 is a program that has exclusive mode natively built into it. It speaks directly with the hardware that you have on your desk or in your studio, and it delivers you the audio direct. After trying a bunch of different audio players, I finally had two different points of playback that sounded the same. This was a huge deal because I could assume safely that Tidal and Foobar 2000 were delivering me the true sound of the music that had been mixed and mastered by me, the way that they're intended to sound. But there was only one problem now. Foobar 2000 and Tidal, although they sounded the same, they didn't sound at all really like my mixes in Ableton, nothing like my mixes in Logic, and closer to my mixes in Pro Tools, but not all the way there. This led me down, of course, the DAW rabbit hole of why do they not sound the same as the exports? Not only do they not sound the same as each other, but they don't sound the same as the exports. In my original video, what I did in order to prove that they were sounding different was I did a screen capture, and that screen capture was supposed to record the playback of Ableton and the playback of Logic. Not the exports, but the playback of both DAWs. Now, somebody in the comments section mentioned something really interesting, and that was that they heard phasing. When doing the comparison of Ableton and Logic, there shouldn't be anything phasey or weird about it. There should just be a consistent differential that could be presented through doing that null test. But there was phasing. There was something funny going on, and I didn't feel good about that. Now, I'm going to sidebar that for a minute and talk about something that I'd noticed, bouncing between all of these DAWs, opening and closing and doing these recordings and trying to figure things out. In opening and closing Daws and then opening and closing Tidal, I noticed that there was a little microphone at the top of my Mac that would pop up every time I opened Pro Tools or Ableton or any of my DAWs. This little microphone would show up, and it was a mic symbol for the internal microphone of the Mac. Now, thinking that, hey, maybe there's something going on there, I'm just going to turn it off. I went into my settings and I turned off the access to the microphone for all my DAWs. And I had everything, I was testing everything except for FL. I think we know that FL had been known to have some internal kind of processing, but I was really just comparing Cubase, Nuendo, Pro Tools, Ableton, Studio One, Reaper, and Logic. Yes, that is everything. Anyway, so I noticed this little microphone up there. Turned off the settings so that it couldn't be accessed by any of the DAWs, and then I opened up Pro Tools. And Pro Tools wouldn't play, which was weird. And then I opened up Ableton, and Ableton wouldn't play either. And so I realized that this little microphone, although it shouldn't have anything to do with my DAW because I wouldn't be using it as an input, had some kind of role to play in the DAW, but had no role to play in Tidal because Tidal doesn't record anything. It doesn't input any audio. It only outputs audio. Now, this is where I made the discovery of core audio having a lot to do with the difference in sound between these DAWs. Lo and behold, out of curiosity, because this little microphone is interacting with my DAW, I head over to my MIDI settings, the audio MIDI output settings or whatever it is on the Mac. A little application that you click and you open it up and you can see all of the I/O paths that you have in your computer. And you can also see their sample rates. This was a slightly concerning step for me because my system sample rate was set to 441. My system mic sample rate, so the internal microphone of my computer, was set to 48 kilohertz, while all of my interfaces and my analog I/O, my converters, are set to 96K. Now, I was familiar with the process of sample rate conversion before discovering that it might be interfering with my DAW playback, but I thought that if you set your DAW up to the right sample rate and your interfaces match and everything matched, that there wouldn't be anything else interfering with the sound. Lo and behold, I changed all the settings to 96K across the board, across aggregate devices, which for the most part I deleted actually just to make sure nothing was going on, across all of my interfaces, and especially on my system mic and system output, all 96K. It was at this point that all of a sudden Ableton, which was the first DAW that I opened up after doing that, started to sound identical to Foobar 2000 and Tidal. I took my master and I dragged it in there and I hit play and I couldn't hear a difference. It sounded the way that I wanted it to sound this whole time. It sounded so clear, and anything I did to it was exactly what I wanted to happen. It was so transparent and open and sounded great. And this was really, really amazing, but also confusing, because how could SRC, which is what it did sound like was happening, be happening to my DAW? How could it be affecting all of my DAWs? And is this what could be happening to other people? Could other people be hearing SRC and thinking that it's different DAWs sounding different or whatever? Which leads me to my next question that I asked myself. If it is indeed SRC that was changing everything and screwing everything up, why did the different DAWs sound different from one another? That didn't make any sense. So next was getting to the bottom of if all the DAWs sounded the same too still, because Ableton sounded right, but do the rest of them? One by one, I opened up Pro Tools. Pro Tools sounded exactly like Ableton. Didn't matter what fader settings or whatever, it sounded identical to Ableton. And at this point, I'm not doing any screen recordings, I'm not doing any loopbacks and null tests. I know that my ears are hearing that they're the same. There's no questioning it. And then I opened up Logic, threw it in Logic, and I will say that I might have felt the slightest difference, but it was so slight that I don't know if it was just me hearing it or the feeling of looking at Logic as a DAW. I don't know. But Reaper sounded the same. Everything really sounded the same. Everything sounded good. So I ended up doing some more research. Turns out Core Audio, as is written in different, very difficult to get places, will do SRC depending on what your system is set to, if it's not matching, for example, the output that you're using for your computer. Now, in layman's terms, if your system isn't matching the output signal of one of the streams that you're using, such as a DAW or your browser or whatever it is, it will just apply SRC, sample rate conversion, to that signal. I understand this is getting a little complicated, but I'll try and keep it simple from here. Ableton is not an audio exclusive DAW. It follows the system. So you have to also be careful with Ableton, because if anything else is screwing with it, it'll simply just perform SRC across your stream. On the flip side, Pro Tools does seem to have the closest sounding SRC, and from my research, the SRC that's being done on the audio signal is done by Ableton and not by Core Audio, so it's handled inside of the program. And to my ears, the SRC that Pro Tools is doing sounds a little bit better. That's, again, as far as the research I could tell, Pro Tools and Cubase are doing internal SRC and then spitting that out to Core Audio, versus Core Audio handling the SRC in one fashion in Logic and then in a different fashion when it comes to Ableton. Of course, the architecture within each DAW also varies. Some are summing to buses and then to the mix bus. Some have mix and master buses. Some have 32-bit float summing. Some have 64-bit. All of these little things make zero difference to the audio path. But when you combine SRC, you get slight variations to how the DAWs are going to sound. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking, some of you geniuses, oh, how could you possibly have that set to 48K, your mic to 48K and your system to this, and expect it all to work? Well, to be completely transparent, I felt stupid. When that happened and that was my discovery, I felt like an idiot. I couldn't believe that that's how this all went down. That was the simple solution to this age-old issue that I'd been facing, along with potentially thousands and millions of other people, just to make sure that I wasn't just an idiot for this, because I don't know, I just wanted to see if other people were doing this too. I opened up the settings in other studios. For those of you who don't know, the settings for the sample rates on your system speakers and your system mic are not easily accessible to you unless you're familiar with Audio MIDI setup, and only in Audio MIDI setup can you access the settings for those things. In major studios here in the city, major studios, these settings were off. All right, I'm not talking about some Joe Blow. It's like these settings, it was the default 48 kilohertz, and I don't think that a lot of people really do know about this. I was talking to some other people, hey man, what are your settings for this and that? Oh, it's set to this. You know, it didn't seem like anybody who I'd run into had known about this or had this set up correctly. And that to me was so interesting. Before any of you geniuses claim that, oh, everyone knows that, you should have known better or whatever, I don't think people do. I really don't think people are aware of this. Now, one of the reasons why a program like Pro Tools is so reliable and people do tend to universally gravitate towards it is because when you have an HDX unit, there is proprietary audio connectivity there that makes it so that you do not have to use Core Audio at all. HDX is its own audio processing software that can run all of your I/O, that does not deal with any SRC stuff and is just exactly what you tell it to be. And that can be very, very relieving in a world where DAWs do seem to sound different and things do seem to vary in their playback. Now, for those of you guys who want to bring up SRC when it comes to drivers of different interface manufacturers, this and that doesn't matter. It doesn't apply to what I'm talking about here. Core Audio is inevitable. It's the omnipresent software that's inside of all your Mac computers. And for you Windows users, don't get too comfortable because there's a story for you as well. I do use Windows computers as well, so just hang tight. Core Audio is inevitable. You cannot use your computer as an audio playback system or capture system without going through Core Audio unless you're using Pro Tools and their proprietary HDX systems. For that reason, it is absolutely true that most of us are for sure hearing differences from DAW to DAW. It's a guarantee. I know this for a fact. I've heard it myself. My own ears have not lied to me. The testing that I've done has not lied to me. But if your settings are right, if your stuff is set all the way across the board at the exact same sample rate, it doesn't have to be 96. Mixing it at 48 is perfectly fine. I mix at 96 because I run AES to my monitors that have a converter inside them and upsample to 96 anyway. So I just have a universal, and I like to record at 96 because vocals and instruments handle warping and other pitching things much better at 96 than they do at 48 and 41. That's a whole other video. Setting up your system so that everything is the same sample rate is the only way to guarantee that your DAWs, whatever they are going to sound the same. Once you hit DAWs that have 32-bit float, 64-bit float, streaming, playback, processing, there couldn't possibly be a sonic difference between the DAWs, and that's what I was having trouble understanding. Now, ASIO, just like with Core Audio, does perform SRC conversion on your DAWs. While ASIO is more exclusive to professional software and it's used for that, it can't possibly output two different audio sources at different sample rates without either performing upsampling on one of them or downsampling on another one of them, both of which would probably introduce artifacts with the upsampling, but for sure will introduce some degradation to your sound quality when you downsample. And I also believed that ASIO as well as Core Audio would have the highest quality, most pristine sounding sample rate converters out there, but then I realized they are latency-free sample rate converters. Of course they're not going to be linear and distortion-free. Of course they're not going to be perfect. They're not going to retain transient information and have accurate low-end and top-end and stereo imaging. That's impossible to have latency-free and have all the detail that you want for your playback. So it's only fair that the system degrades your audio quality. So in essence, I am slightly embarrassed to say that yes, all DAWs to my ear, at least to the depth and to the amount of detail that I can discern with my ears, sound the same, pretty much. Logic, I'm still sketched out by you a little bit, but everything sounds the same. Do they sound different if your settings are wrong? And can they differ from one another because of that? Yes. Sample rate conversion is a real thing, and that's not the only thing happening under the hood. There's dithering, there's other things that Core Audio is doing in order to self-preserve, to make sure your machine is not doing the impossible. SRC is not only applied to your output on your computer, but also your inputs, which means that if you're recording audio into your computer, you got to make sure that your sample rates are all lined up as well. Otherwise, it would perform SRC of some kind to your audio, in and out. As crazy as that is. So, hopefully this ends this conversation properly, because I don't think it's really been covered properly by anybody. I think Sonic Scoop touched on this briefly, but not in depth to the point where he explains whether or not he knows that this is affecting DAWs the way that they could be, the way that I spoke about it today. It's a very, very real thing. And again, major studios, major players in the game do not have their computer settings set correctly. I know this for a fact, people not just in Canada, but just in general. And Pro Tools is so reliable in this fashion because it bypasses, it can, when you use an HDX rig or unit, it can bypass everything that we've talked about today. Thank you so much for waiting on this, and I'll see you guys again soon. Ciao.